all, and thank you to Carlos Espinosa for inviting me to speak to you about participant observation, a topic dear to my heart. Participant observation is central to ethnography, which in turn is the cornerstone of cultural anthropology, though also fundamental to certain branches of sociology and used in many other disciplines. As a method, it involves immersing yourself in the lives of a group of people you are studying in order to begin experiencing life from their point of view. We call this the emic perspective as opposed to the etic perspective.
Joan,
Yes.
excuse me, could you turn up the volume on your side?
Okay, I think we're okay then.
Yes, now it's perfect.
So thank you for inviting me to speak to you about participant observation, a topic dear to my heart. Now I'm hearing my feedback coming back, which is a little disconcerting. Okay. Participant observation is central to ethnography, which in turn is the cornerstone of cultural anthropology, though also fundamental to certain branches of sociology and used in many other disciplines. As a method, it involves immersing yourself in the lives of a group of people you are studying in order to begin to experience life from their point of view. We call this the emic perspective as opposed to the etic perspective. These terms are borrowed from the descriptive linguistic terms. Okay, so I was talking about the difference between the emic perspective and the etic perspective and how these two views come out of the field of descriptive linguistics, where phonemic is thinking about more about what's coming from inside, how people understand, and etic coming from the outside. So shifting from language to culture, we could say that counting the number of children that women in a particular society have would be taking an etic perspective. And staying within an etic perspective, you might examine environmental or economic trends and relate them to the number of children in a community. However, if you want to find out what community members think about the ideal number of children and why, then you're entering the emic realm. And in order to do this, you must spend a lot of time in the community observing practices and conversations, observing people in their workplace and in leisure activities. So I'm going to spend some time explaining what I mean by embodied intersubjectivity. And then go into the process of doing participant observation. I should say that at the outset that I've never had a course in participant observation or ethnographic field methods. When I was a graduate student in the 1980s at the University of Texas at Austin, we heard anecdotes about fieldwork from our professors, but we experienced it as a trial by fire, something you had to figure out on your own. And once you did, it served as a rite of passage into the anthropological fold. Michael Agar's The Professional Stranger came out in 1980, and we all devoured the book, but not because it provided a recipe for doing ethnography, but because it talked intelligently about the role of the ethnographer and the interplay between science and interpretation. So when I became a professor, there was a push to codify methods. People began talking about skill sets and methodological toolkits, and we were asked by colleagues in other disciplines to offer a class on ethnographic field methods, and so we did. And I've been teaching that class every other year for about 10 years now, and I draw on it for this talk as I draw on many years of conducting ethnographic fieldwork in Europe, North America, USA, and Latin America. So the subtitle of my talk is Embodied Intersubjectivity in Qualitative Research. So I thought I would begin by explaining what I mean by this. And I'm not going to go into a philosophical or psychological discussion of intersubjectivity. I only chose that term to emphasize that the data produced during participant observation like meaning itself, originates in social interaction between complex human subjects, of which the ethnographer is one. The ethnographer must try to abandon ethnocentric ideas that come from imposing the rules of his or her own culture onto the practices of the target culture. But the goal is not to be a detached, objective observer. The goal is intersubjectivity. In the process of developing trust over time, both the ethnographer and the subject population are changed. No one has a single homogeneous self. Julie Giabacchioni explores the tensions between the personal self, an ethnographic self, and an academic self during ethnographic fieldwork. But the people we interact with may also be changed by our presence. The heterogeneous self is built through a series of interactions with people, and participant observation allows us to develop new or submerged parts of ourselves through interacting with people who are different from our normal community. And this difference can be defined in many ways. I chose embodied because we each inhabit a body that tells people a lot about us, whether or not we choose to reveal it. I call this projection embodiment. We can't really mask our gender or our age, and the clothes we wear and the roughness of our hands tells our interlocutors something about our line of work, our social class, perhaps even our sympathies. The language we use indexes our origin, our educational level, our personality. Some things we can successfully mask for a while, but know that secrets are stressful and hard to keep. In participant observation, we are, as John Law writes, entangled in our flesh, in our versions of vision, and in relations of power that pass through and are articulated by us. Being entangled in our flesh doesn't only mean that people respond to us in a particular way, but also that we are drawn to different topics based on our own experience, which changes at different points of our life. In my first book, based on participant observation among traditional puppeteers in Liège, Belgium, I wrote about this. I saw myself as a young linguistic anthropologist interested in the regional language of Walloon and its use in traditional verbal art forms, gathering information for my dissertation. I was shocked to discover how often I was interpolated as the daughter of an American soldier who fought in Belgium during World War II. And that's how I was usually introduced to people. A few years later, when my father visited me in the field, his mere presence brought forth stories about their experiences during the war, and that these people who I had become very close to had never told me. And just as his presence drew war stories from others, the smells and sights of the Belgian landscape brought memories of the war back to my father, and he began to tell stories that he had buried long ago, stories in which people were scared and confused, not confident and heroic. These informal, serendipitous conversations in Belgium about war helped me understand the centrality of battles in the puppet theater, even though these battles in the puppet theater were placed in the Middle Ages. So the way in which my father, as an old American soldier, provided a stimulus for others to tell of their wartime experiences is part of projection embodiment. But the way in which the sights and smells of Belgium and the sounds of the language brought back wartime memories to him speaks to another aspect of embodiment that I call receptive embodiment. And this speaks to the importance of being in a place and engaging all of your senses. Other academic pursuits can be done in front of your computer screen, but participant observation calls for displacement from one's office and from one's normal routine. It requires giving up control to a certain extent as you privilege their daily rhythms over your own, their interpretations of practice over your own. It involves absorbing other smells, sounds, sights, and tastes. The holism that we experience in the field allows us to cast our interpretive net wide and to see multiple connections across several domains of activity. Another aspect of embodiment I'd like to point out is the way in which we develop over the course of our lives. Our experiences change us. So returning to a field site is never the same. You're not the same, and they're not the same. And your relationship has also changed since you are returning and not a new acquaintance. It's a lot easier to catch up once you know who all the characters are. But when a lot of time has gone by, your interests may have changed. This is partly due to our changing biologies, but also to different laws, economies, theoretical frameworks, relationships, and practices and experiences in general. When I returned to Liège as a new mother after spending 2 years in Morocco, I was much more attuned to the plight of North African immigrants and the negotiation of work and childcare. When I returned to Morocco after 25 years, the young mothers I once knew were now caring for dying parents. But it was also a different place politically, with much more attention given to minority ethnic identity and gender equality. Heraclitus's quote that no man ever steps into the same river twice is appropriate here. From this description, it should be clear that the reliability or the ability to replicate the results of a study is not a cherished quality of participant observation, nor is it achievable. The strength of participant observation as a method is increased validity of your information. This is based on exposure over time and the trust that you have developed with the people whose behavior you are studying. Time is an important element of participant observation because people can alter their behavior away from the norm for only so long, then it becomes too tiresome. My sociolinguistics professor, John Baugh, once told me that to record vernacular language, you need to keep the conversation going and then throw out the first hour. All professional observers struggle with what we call the observer's paradox. We want to observe how something, or in the case of social scientists, how someone acts when he or she is not being observed, because the act of being observed might well affect behavior. So how is participant observation done, you might ask? Simply put, it's done by immersing yourself in a different community of practice and giving yourself time each day to think about the day's events and to record your observations. Of course, you don't enter the field a blank slate. You have read about people and practices on which your study focuses and have formed some opinions. In anthropology, participant observation was traditionally conducted in foreign small-scale societies over a period of at least a year to make sure that the ethnographer could participate in and observe seasonal rituals, both secular and sacred. The results were written up in an ethnography that covered social, political, and economic organization in an attempt to be holistic. Nowadays, studies tend to be much more focused and might be conducted in one's own society. Even when not traveling halfway across the world, focusing on a community of practice that you don't belong to entails learning new ways of speaking and practicing. Observing precedes participating because you don't want to impose your practices on the group you're studying. Throughout your stay, you will sometimes be more of an observer and sometimes more of a participant, and there's no hard and fast rule about this. Questions play an important role in participant observation, but a structured questionnaire is not a good way to start. It's better to embed questions in informal conversations. We first observe how conversations are structured in the community and try to attain some level of communicative competence. Where and when do conversations take place? Meal times are often a privileged space for conversation, or when people are doing a sedentary task, especially one in which you could be of help, such as cleaning rocks out of dried beans. Participant observation is an inductive process in which we look for patterns in our observations rather than deductively going into the field with a hypothesis that we aim to test. That is not to say that ethnographers cannot incorporate more quantitative methods and hypothesis testing, but generally this is done after a period of exploration and might not be done at all. Central to participant observation is the taking of field notes. I tell students to always keep a tiny notebook in their pocket to record specific information that is difficult to remember. People's phone numbers, for instance, or the ingredients of a fertilizer. Now that's more commonly and easily done with cell phones, but try to match your technology use in public to what's common in the community you're studying. If everybody is using cell phones and cameras, no big deal. But if not, then you must think about the image that you're projecting by doing so. What you need to understand is how faulty our memories are. The vividness of experience fades rather quickly. Writing something up just after it happens brings forth a wealth of detail. Reporting it a week later might result in only a skeleton description. Photographs, video, and audio recordings are all important ways of documenting the culture you are studying as well, but field notes serve to contextualize all the other information you gather. Digital recordings of all sorts can also serve as mnemonic devices and help you write more detailed field notes, as well as serving as prompts for future conversations and gifts for people who have spent time telling you about their lives. Field notes have different purposes, and people vary as to how much they combine these purposes or keep them separate. The central type are descriptive field notes, in which you construct a chronological narrative of the unfolding of your knowledge. There are also methodological field notes, where you address techniques that you used or that did or didn't work and how they might be improved. And there are analytic field notes, in which you attempt to interpret something that you have observed. While you cease writing descriptive field notes after you leave the field, you continue writing analytic notes as you reach different levels of understanding. I also like to keep charts and timelines of what types of information I have already collected and what I aim to collect before I leave. Finally, many ethnographers like to keep a personal diary. This is particularly cathartic when interactions are difficult and fieldwork often leaves one in a state of discomfort. Sometimes letters home can fulfill this purpose, and it could be that with the ease of connectivity these days, Skype conversations can serve the same cathartic role. It is methodologically useful to be able to track your moods and physical states to see how it might be affecting the information that you're collecting. Most ethnographers take a break partway through their research to assess the information they've gathered and what they have left to do. Participant observation leaves you with mountains of information. Pages, highlighting parts, and making file cards that direct me to the information in my bound field notes. After the age of computers, I was able to use search tools and recompose thematic text files. In my most recent fieldwork, I use an online program called Deduce for coding and excerpting from field notes and interview transcripts. As you might imagine, there is no simple process of writing up one's research in the way that scientists talk about that final stage. The openness of participant observation, the way in which our research questions can change significantly over the course of our fieldwork, and how new methods can be introduced, creates some problems with the institutional review boards that want to know exactly what questions you will be asking before you ask them. I don't think you have quite the same level of institutional review boards as we do here, but I'd be glad to talk about that some more afterwards if you're interested. It's difficult to explain to evaluators who come from scientific backgrounds about the flow of life and conversations and how we want to stay open to serendipitous discoveries. Serendipity, in fact, has been called the essence of fieldwork research, and the chances of serendipitous discovery increase with time spent in the field. This is why participant observation in the traditional sense is not an efficient method. It takes a lot of time and produces much more information than will ever be adequately analyzed, interpreted, and published. Nevertheless, I think it's the method through which the researcher grows the most. And I think it's the method that generates new questions that are more grounded in local realities. Through participant observation, we come to know ourselves more thoroughly as we learn about other ways of being. This is the essence of embodied intersubjectivity. And I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions.